Captain Victoria Sterling raised the rifle to her shoulder, and the only thing running through her mind was that night 15 years ago, the Taliban assault, 3 dead soldiers. The decision that ended everything. Now, at 42, everyone at Fort Campbell thought she was just another desk officer who'd requested a transfer for family reasons. But General Harrison was about to learn something that would change everything. "Rookie," he laughed, pointing to the distant target. "That's 2,847 meters. Only legends hit that far." Victoria's finger found the trigger. If she made this shot, her secret would be out. But some secrets were meant to be revealed. The morning sun beat down on Fort Campbell's rifle range like Judgment Day. Captain Victoria Sterling stood behind the firing line, watching General Harrison set up what he clearly thought would be the most entertaining training demonstration of his career. Around them, 8 junior officers gathered in a loose circle, phones already out, ready to record what they expected to be a spectacular failure. "Gentlemen," Harrison's voice boomed across the range. "Today we're going to teach our newest transfer, the difference between civilian shooting and military precision." His eyes locked on Victoria with the kind of predatory amusement that came from 30 years of breaking 2006. Overconfident soldiers. "Sterling here thinks she's ready for advanced marksmanship training." Lieutenant Rodriguez snickered. "Sir, didn't she come from logistics? I heard she's been pushing papers for the last 5 years." "Exactly my point," Harrison replied, his grin widening. "Perfect example of why we don't hand out sniper rifles to every soldier who thinks they can shoot." He gestured toward the distant target. "See that steel plate way out there? That's our impossible shot. 2,847 meters of pure humiliation for anyone foolish enough to attempt it." Victoria kept her expression neutral, but inside, every nerve was screaming. She'd spent 8 months at this base carefully maintaining her cover. Victoria Sterling, the quiet desk officer, the paper pusher who stayed late to finish reports, the unremarkable middle-aged woman who ate lunch alone and never talked about her past. What they didn't know was that Victoria Sterling was a lie. "How many people have hit that target, sir?" asked Sergeant Kim, a young sniper fresh from school. Harrison's chest puffed with pride. "In the entire history of Fort Campbell? 3. All of them legendary shooters with decades of experience. The current record holder was Marine Force Recon. Took him 4 attempts." He turned to Victoria. "Sterling, you still want to embarrass yourself in front of witnesses?" "Yes, sir," Victoria replied quietly, too quietly. The other officers exchanged glances. Most transfer requests to advanced marksmanship came from combat veterans looking to add skills. A logistics officer requesting sniper training was either brave or delusional. Harrison handed her a rifle. Standard M24 sniper weapon system. The weight felt familiar in her hands, like shaking hands with an old friend she'd tried to forget. Federal match-grade ammunition. Same load the record holder used. "Let's see what you can do with real equipment instead of spreadsheets." The laughter that followed made Victoria's jaw tighten, but she said nothing. Some storms had to build before they could break. Have you ever been in a situation where everyone underestimated you, where they looked at you and saw exactly what you wanted them to see? Drop a comment if you know that feeling, because Victoria was about to show them why sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous. Victoria settled into the prone position behind the rifle. The familiar ritual began automatically. Check the scope. Verify the 0. Feel the wind. Read the mirage. All muscle memory from another life, when her name wasn't Victoria Sterling, and people called her something else entirely. "Take your time, rookie," Harrison called out. "I know this is probably more challenging than anything you've attempted before. No shame in missing by a few hundred yards." Through the scope, the target looked impossibly small. A steel plate 18 inches across, shimmering in the heat at a distance that would challenge most professional snipers. But Victoria had made harder shots, much harder shots, in places where missing meant watching good soldiers die. She closed her eyes for a moment and was back in Afghanistan. October 2008, Firebase Phoenix under siege. 3 Taliban fighters directing mortar fire from a compound 2,900 meters away. Her spotter, Johnson, calling for the shot that would save a pinned-down squad. "Ghost, this is Bravo Team," the radio had crackled. "We need that sniper down now." Ghost. That's what they used to call her. Before the IED. Before Johnson, Peterson, and Miller died following the path she'd cleared for them. Before Sergeant First Class Monica Cross officially died in a classified report, and Victoria Sterling was born in the paperwork that followed. "You having second thoughts there, Sterling?" Harrison's voice snapped her back to the present. "It's okay if you want to start with something easier. Maybe the 500-meter target?" Victoria opened her eyes and began her breathing routine. In through the nose, hold, natural respiratory pause. Just like they'd taught her at sniper school 15 years ago, when she was young and believed precision could solve any problem. But this wasn't about solving problems. This was about revealing truth. The wind was coming from the northwest at 12 knots, gusting to 15. She could see it in the grass movement, feel it against her left cheek. The mirage through the scope told her about thermal layers and air density, information that came from 10,000 hours of practice in every condition nature could provide. If you've ever had to hide your true abilities to protect yourself or others, this story probably hits close to home. Victoria had been hiding for 15 years, but some skills are too deeply carved into your soul to ever truly disappear. "Whenever you're ready, Captain," Harrison said. The way he emphasized her rank made it clear he thought she was playing dress-up soldier. Remember, this is what separates the professionals from the pretenders. Victoria made her windage adjustments. Click, click, click. The precise movements of someone who'd done this thousands of times before. Around her, the other officers fell silent, sensing something shift in the air. "Wait," Lieutenant Martinez said, lowering his binoculars. "Sir, the way she's handling that rifle." "What about it?" Harrison snapped. "She's not shooting like an amateur. Look at her position, her breathing, the way she's reading the wind." Martinez's voice carried a note of uncertainty. "This isn't her first time behind a precision rifle." Harrison's confident smirk faltered slightly. He raised his own binoculars, studying Victoria more carefully. Something about her posture had changed. The hesitant desk officer was gone, replaced by someone who moved with the fluid confidence of an apex predator. Victoria found her trigger finger settling naturally into position. Straight back pressure. No jerking. No slapping. The smooth, consistent pull that had been drilled into her until it became as automatic as breathing. Through the scope, the crosshairs danced across the target in tiny movements that corresponded to her heartbeat. She timed the shot for the natural pause between beats. The moment of perfect stillness that every precision shooter learned to recognize and exploit. "Hold on," Sergeant Kim whispered. "Look at how steady she is. That's not beginner's luck." Harrison's face was cycling through confusion and growing alarm. "Sterling, where exactly did you serve before your transfer here?" Victoria didn't answer. Her world had narrowed to the view through the scope, to the delicate crosshair movements that she would time to coincide with the wind's momentary pause. She thought about Johnson, Peterson, and Miller, about the shot that had saved them temporarily and killed them permanently, about 15 years of living with the knowledge that her precision had guided them into a death trap. But she also thought about all the other shots, the enemy snipers she'd eliminated before they could kill American soldiers, the IED emplacers she'd stopped. The countless times her skill had meant the difference between soldiers going home to their families and being shipped back in flag-draped boxes. The wind paused. Her heartbeat found the space between beats. And in that moment of perfect stillness, Victoria Sterling ceased to exist. Monica Cross squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with familiar authority. The .308 round left the muzzle at 2,650 feet per second, beginning its 3-second journey across 2,847 meters of Kentucky air. For those 3 seconds, the range fell completely silent except for the whistle of wind through the grass. Then the distant sound of metal striking metal echoed across the range. Jesus Christ, someone whispered. Through the spotting scopes, they could all see it. The steel target, punched clean through by a round that had traveled nearly 3 kilometers to find its mark with surgical precision. General Harrison stood frozen, his binoculars locked on the target, his face cycling through disbelief, shock, and dawning horror. When he finally lowered the glasses, his voice was barely audible. "That's impossible. Nobody makes that shot. Not under these conditions. Not with this equipment. Not." He stopped, staring at Victoria as if seeing her for the first time. "Who the hell are you? Can you believe what just happened? A desk officer just made the impossible shot that only 3 people in Fort Campbell's history had ever achieved. Hit that like button if you think General Harrison is about to get the shock of his life." Victoria slowly raised her head from the scope. For the first time in 15 years, she didn't have to pretend to be someone else. "My name," she said quietly, looking directly at Harrison, "was Sergeant First Class Monica Cross. Call sign, Ghost." She paused, watching the color drain from his face. "And General, that wasn't even my longest shot." The silence that followed was absolute. 15 years of carefully maintained fiction evaporated in the space between heartbeats, and Victoria felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she'd carried for so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand without it. Lieutenant Rodriguez's phone slipped from his nerveless fingers. "Ghost? The Monica Cross? From Afghanistan?" Colonel Webb stepped forward, his weathered face pale with recognition. "You're supposed to be dead," the records said. "The records say what they needed to say," Victoria replied, safing the rifle with movements so fluid they seemed rehearsed. Monica Cross was too dangerous to exist after Firebase Phoenix. Too many questions that couldn't be answered without compromising operations that never officially happened. Harrison found his voice, though it came out as a croak. "I know that name. I know your real record, the classified one." His hand was shaking as he pointed at her. 73 confirmed kills over 4 deployments. The only sniper in military history to make a verified shot over 3,200 meters. 3,218 meters, Victoria corrected. Hindu Kush Mountains, October 2008. Enemy sniper directing fire against a medical evacuation. 1 shot, perfect conditions. Her voice grew distant. 3 wounded soldiers made it home to their families that day. "That's a world record," breathed Sergeant Kim. "That shot is in the classified military records as the longest confirmed sniper kill in combat history." "It was also my last shot as Monica Cross," Victoria said. 3 days later, Johnson, Peterson, and Miller were dead, and I was being processed for identity transition. The group of officers stood in stunned silence. The woman they dismissed as a logistics officer was one of the most skilled snipers in military history. The rookie who'd requested advanced training was a combat veteran whose exploits were legendary among those with the clearance to know about them. Harrison's arrogance had completely evaporated, replaced by something approaching awe. "Captain Sterling, Sergeant Cross, I owe you an apology." "You owe me nothing, General," Victoria replied. "You thought you were dealing with a desk officer who needed to learn her limitations. You had no way of knowing you were standing in the presence of someone who's been trying to forget those limitations for 15 years. "What made you take the shot today?" Webb asked. "After all this time in hiding, what made you risk exposure?" Victoria looked out across the range, toward the target that still bore the evidence of her precision. "Because I realized that hiding from who I am wasn't honoring Johnson, Peterson, and Miller's memory. It was dishonoring it. They died doing their jobs as soldiers. The least I could do was remember how to do mine." Lieutenant Martinez lowered his phone, his face filled with something between admiration and disbelief. "Ma'am, what was your longest confirmed kill?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of classified history. 3,218 meters. Hindu Kush Mountains. Enemy sniper who was directing fire against a medical evacuation helicopter. 1 shot, Perfect conditions, and 3 wounded soldiers made it home to their families instead of coming back in body bags. "How many lives did you save during your deployments?" Rodriguez asked. "I stopped counting after the first 100, Victoria said simply. "That wasn't the point. The point was that every shot I took, or didn't take, had consequences that extended far beyond the target." General Harrison had been quietly studying her throughout the exchange. Now he stepped forward. His entire demeanor changed. "Sergeant Cross, I have a question. What are your plans now that your cover is blown?" Victoria considered this carefully. "I'm not sure, General. For 15 years I've been trying to figure out how to live with the mistakes I made. Maybe it's time to figure out how to live with the things I did right. The Army has need of soldiers with your particular expertise," Harrison said. "Fort Bragg is starting a new advanced sniper training program. We need someone who can teach the next generation how to make impossible shots in impossible conditions. More importantly," Colonel Webb added, "we need someone who can teach them about the responsibility that comes with that precision, about the weight of the decisions they'll have to make." Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in 15 years, the possibility of being useful again. Not just as a shooter, but as a teacher, a mentor, someone who could help other soldiers avoid the mistakes she'd made while maximizing the good they could do. "There's one condition," she said finally. "If I take this assignment, I do it as Monica Cross, not Victoria Sterling. No more lies about who I am or what I've done. The soldiers I train deserve to know they're learning from someone who's made mistakes and learned from them." Harrison nodded slowly. "The military has learned that our greatest weapons aren't our equipment or our technology, they're our people. And sometimes our most valuable people are the ones who've been broken and put themselves back together." As the officers began to disperse, talking in excited whispers about what they'd witnessed, Victoria remained at the firing line, looking out toward the distant target. Johnson, Peterson, and Miller would always be dead. That would never change. But maybe Monica Cross could learn to live with being alive. If you've made it this far, you know this isn't just a story about an impossible shot. It's about second chances, about the courage to reveal who you really are, and about the hidden heroes who walk among us every day. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of women who changed everything with a single moment of truth. And drop a comment below. Have you ever had to hide your true abilities? 3 months later, Fort Bragg's advanced sniper training program had become the most requested assignment in the Army. Word had spread through military channels like wildfire. Monica Cross was back. Ghost was teaching again. Victoria stood at the head of a classroom filled with 12 elite marksmen, each handpicked from different units across the military. Marines, Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, Air Force security forces, the best shooters America had to offer, all gathered to learn from a woman they'd only heard about in whispered conversations and classified briefings. "Before we begin," Victoria said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned respect through blood and precision, "I want each of you to understand something. You weren't sent here to learn how to shoot. You already know how to shoot." Sergeant Williams, a Marine sniper with 15 confirmed kills, raised his hand. "Then why are we here, ma'am?" Victoria walked to the whiteboard and wrote a single question. "What is the most important shot a sniper never takes?" The room fell silent. These were warriors trained to engage targets, to eliminate threats, to use their skills to support their units. The concept seemed contradictory. "Anyone?" Victoria prompted. Corporal Jackson, a ranger with combat experience in Syria, spoke up. "Ma'am, every shot we don't take is a missed opportunity to complete the mission." "Interesting perspective," Victoria replied. "Anyone disagree?" Staff Sergeant Chen, a Navy SEAL, leaned forward. "Ma'am, in Kandahar last year, I had a Taliban commander in my crosshairs. Perfect shot, clear background. But there was a child playing in the compound yard, maybe 20 feet from the target." "What did you do?" Victoria asked. "I held my position for 3 hours, waiting for the kid to move. The commander eventually left without me taking the shot." Chen's voice carried regret. His unit hit one of our convoys the next week. 2 Marines died. Victoria nodded slowly. And how do you feel about that decision now? Like I failed my mission, ma'am. What if I told you the Taliban commander was using that child as insurance? That he knew American snipers wouldn't risk civilian casualties? Victoria moved closer to Chen. What if I told you that child was his nephew, and killing him would have made the commander even more dangerous? Chen's eyes widened. How could you know that, ma'am? Because I had the same shot, Sergeant. Same compound. Same commander. 18 months before your deployment. Victoria's voice grew distant. I made a different choice. The classroom was dead silent now. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. I took the shot. Clean kill, no civilian casualties. The child ran inside, screaming. Victoria paused, letting the weight of her words settle. That child grew up to become one of the most effective IED makers in Afghanistan. He killed 37 American soldiers over the next 5 years. The silence stretched until it became painful. The shot you don't take, Sergeant Chen, might save more lives than the shot you do take. That's what I'm here to teach you. Not marksmanship. Judgment. Want to know what real combat decision-making looks like? The choices that haunt warriors for decades? Keep watching, because Victoria's about to share the lesson that cost her everything. Lieutenant Morrison, an Air Force sniper, shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, how do we make those calculations? How do we know when not to shoot? Victoria turned to face him. Tell me about your longest shot, Lieutenant. 1,847 meters, ma'am. Enemy sniper in Iraq. 1 shot, 1 kill. How did you feel afterward? Morrison looked confused. Successful, ma'am. I eliminated a threat. Did you know that sniper had a family? No, ma'am. That wasn't relevant to the mission. Victoria nodded. I used to think the same way. Targets were targets. Threats were threats. Clean, simple, mathematical. She walked to the window overlooking the training ranges. Then I learned something that changed everything. She turned back to the class. In 2007, I eliminated a sniper outside Fallujah. Perfect shot, textbook execution. Found out later he was 15 years old. Forced into service by insurgents who threatened to kill his family if he refused. The room was so quiet you could hear heartbeats. Was I wrong to take that shot? Victoria asked. He was actively engaging American forces. He'd already killed 2 of our soldiers. He was a legitimate threat. Sergeant Williams raised his hand tentatively. Ma'am, you couldn't have known his age or circumstances. Couldn't I? Victoria challenged. What if I'd taken more time to observe? What if I'd gathered more intelligence? What if I'd found a way to neutralize the threat without killing a child who was as much a victim as anyone else? Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a veteran of 4 deployments, spoke quietly. Ma'am, with respect, second-guessing every shot would paralyze us in the field. Would it? Victoria asked. Or would it make us more precise? More thoughtful? More human? She moved to the center of the classroom. Here's what I've learned in 20 years of pulling triggers. The shots that haunt you aren't the ones you miss. They're the ones you make without thinking about the consequences. This is the kind of raw, honest military training you won't see anywhere else. Victoria's teaching these elite snipers something more valuable than marksmanship. She's teaching them wisdom. Hit subscribe if you want to see more stories about the warriors who carry the real weight of combat. Victoria pulled out a file from her desk. Each of you will receive a scenario over the next 2 weeks. Some will require engagement. Some will require restraint. Some will require you to make decisions that have no clear right answer. She opened the file and began distributing folders. You'll be evaluated not just on your technical skills, but on your reasoning, your humanity, and your ability to live with the choices you make. Corporal Jackson examined his folder. Ma'am, what if we make the wrong choice? Victoria's smile was sad but understanding. Jackson, every choice in combat has consequences. The goal isn't to make perfect choices. It's to make informed ones. Ones you can carry for the rest of your life. Ones you can carry for the rest of your life. She returned to the front of the classroom. Let me tell you about Firebase Phoenix. October 2008. I was positioned on Overwatch. 2,900 meters from a Taliban compound. 3 of our soldiers, Johnson, Peterson, and Miller, were pinned down by enemy fire. The students leaned forward. This was the stuff of legend, the classified operations that made Monica Cross a ghost story told in sniper schools. I had a clear shot on the enemy sniper directing fire at our guys. Perfect conditions, perfect position. I squeezed the trigger, made the kill, and cleared the path for Johnson's team to advance. Victoria paused, her voice growing heavy. They moved through the route I'd secured and walked into an IED that killed all 3 instantly. The weight of her words hung in the air like smoke. For 15 years I blamed my precision for their deaths. I thought if I'd missed that shot, if I'd been less skilled, they'd still be alive. She looked at each student in turn. I was wrong. Staff Sergeant Chen leaned forward. How so, ma'am? Because I was assuming my shot was the defining moment of their deaths. That my skill was more important than their choices, their training, their courage. Victoria's voice strengthened. Johnson, Peterson, and Miller were soldiers. They knew the risks. They made the choice to advance because that was their mission. She walked to the whiteboard and wrote 3 names. Johnson, Peterson, Michigan, LLER. These men didn't die because I was too good at my job. They died because they were doing theirs. My job was to give them the best chance possible. Their job was to use that chance to complete their mission. Victoria turned back to the class. Honoring their sacrifice means accepting that soldiers make choices, not just snipers. Sergeant Williams nodded slowly. Ma'am, how do we balance precision with conscience? By remembering that every target was someone's son, daughter, brother, sister. By understanding that taking a life, even an enemy life, should never be easy. Victoria picked up a photograph from her desk. This is Ahmad Hassan, Taliban sniper I killed in 2006. 18 years old, forced into service to feed his family. She held up another photo. This is Sergeant Mike Crawford. Ahmad killed him 2 hours before I killed Ahmad. 22 years old, married, baby daughter he never met. The students studied both photographs. Which life was worth more? Victoria asked. Ahmad's or Crawford's? Lieutenant Morrison ventured. Crawford was one of ours, ma'am. That's the soldier's answer, Victoria replied. But the human answer is that both lives had value. Both left families behind. Both were products of circumstances beyond their control. She collected the photographs. The difference is that Crawford chose to be there. Ahmad was forced. Crawford was fighting for democracy and freedom. Ahmad was fighting for survival. But they were both 18-year-old kids with their whole lives ahead of them until I squeezed a trigger. The room was processing this complexity, the moral weight that came with the precision they'd trained their whole careers to achieve. Ma'am, Corporal Jackson asked quietly, how do you live with that knowledge? Victoria's answer came from years of therapy, sleepless nights, and hard-won wisdom. By making sure every shot I take, or don't take, serves something bigger than my own mission completion rate. By teaching you to think before you shoot. By honoring the dead on both sides, by being better than I was. If this kind of deep, honest conversation about the realities of combat resonates with you, you're going to love the other stories on this channel. We don't just tell you about heroes, we show you the complex human beings behind the legends. Don't forget to ring that notification bell. The bell rang, signaling the end of class. As students filed out, several approached Victoria with questions, with thanks, with the kind of thoughtful engagement that told her she was doing something right. Staff Sergeant Chen lingered. Ma'am, that Taliban commander I didn't shoot? I found out later he was killed in a drone strike 3 days after I left my position. Turned out the child in the compound was his son, and killing the father in front of him would have created another generation of fighters. Victoria nodded. Sometimes the hardest shot to make is no shot at all, Sergeant. You made the right choice, even if it didn't feel like it at the time. As the last student left, Victoria sat at her desk and pulled out the photograph she kept in the top drawer. Johnson, Peterson, and Miller, smiling at the camera during a break in operations. Young men who'd believed in their mission and died pursuing it. Still teaching, she said quietly to the photograph. Different lessons now, but still teaching. The wind shifted outside, and Victoria automatically noted the change in conditions. Some habits never died, but maybe they weren't supposed to. Maybe they were meant to evolve, to serve new purposes, to become tools for building instead of destroying. The ghost had found her mission again, and this time, she was going to get it right. Monica Cross was back, but she was better. 6 weeks into the program, stories started filtering back from deployments worldwide. Stories about snipers who held their fire when civilians were at risk. Stories about soldiers who came home with fewer kills but cleaner consciences. General Harrison received a classified report from Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant Chen had identified a high-value target but noticed children in the compound. Instead of taking the shot, he'd called in psychological operations specialists who convinced the target's family to evacuate. The target surrendered without bloodshed. Chen credits his training with Monica Cross. Harrison read aloud to Victoria. Says he learned to see the whole picture, not just the crosshairs. Harrison flipped through more reports. Lieutenant Morrison identified an IED team in Syria. Instead of engaging immediately, he observed their pattern for 3 days. His patience allowed special operations to capture the entire cell without firing a shot. 17 terrorists in custody. 0 civilian casualties. These were the victories that mattered. Not the impossible shots or legendary kill counts, but the lives preserved, the wisdom passed from one generation of warriors to the next. What you're seeing here is unprecedented in military training. Not just how to be a better shooter, but how to be a better human being. If stories like these inspire you, make sure you're subscribed because we're just getting started with these incredible hidden heroes. Victoria walked to her office window, looking out at the ranges where her students practiced daily. They weren't just practicing marksmanship anymore. They were practicing judgment, restraint, and tactical patience that saved lives. Her phone buzzed with a message from Sergeant Williams, deployed in Iraq. Ghost, held my fire today. 3 kids in the target area. Found another way. Mission complete. Everyone goes home. Thank you for teaching me to think. Victoria showed the message to Harrison. This is what success looks like, General. Not the shots they make, but the shots they choose not to make. You realize what you've done? Harrison asked. You've changed how an entire generation of snipers thinks about their profession. I've tried to give them what I didn't have, Victoria replied. A teacher who understood that precision without wisdom is just expensive destruction. Corporal Jackson entered, fresh from graduation and selected for immediate deployment to Eastern Europe. Ma'am, I wanted to thank you before I shipped out. For what, Jackson? For teaching me that being the best sniper doesn't mean having the highest kill count. It means making the right decisions under impossible pressure. Jackson paused. My grandfather was a sniper in Vietnam. Never talked about it, but I could see the weight he carried. What did you learn here that he didn't have? Victoria asked. That it's okay to feel that weight. That carrying it makes us human, not weak. Jackson straightened. Ma'am, I'm going overseas knowing that every shot I take or don't take serves something bigger than just completing the mission. As Jackson left, Victoria felt something she'd been searching for since Firebase Phoenix 15 years ago. Not redemption, that was too simple. Purpose. The knowledge that her skills, her mistakes, and her wisdom were serving the next generation of warriors. Harrison gathered his files. The Pentagon wants to expand this program, train instructors worldwide. Victoria considered this. On one condition, Every instructor has to understand that we're not just teaching soldiers to shoot, we're teaching them to think, to feel, to carry the weight of their choices with dignity. As evening fell over Fort Bragg, Victoria remained in her office, updating lesson plans that would soon be taught around the world. The ghost had become a teacher, the legend had become a leader, and the broken soldier had become the foundation for something unprecedented. Warriors who understood that true strength came from knowing when not to use it. Monica Cross had found her second chance, and she was using it to give hundreds of other soldiers the tools she'd never had, the knowledge that precision without conscience was just accurate destruction, and that the strongest warriors were those who understood the true weight of their power. The legend lived on, but now it served life instead of death.